My name is Caitlin McConnell, and I'm here today with Leslie Wyman, the retired director of the White River Valley Historical Society. We're at the museum in Forsyth. Today's date is October 11th, 2024, and today we're discussing Leslie's expertise and experience with grave dowsing. This interview is part of Buried History, an oral history project between Ozarks Alive and Missouri State University Libraries. So thank you for letting me come visit with you today.
Thank you. I'm excited to get to talk to you about one of my passions.
Well, thank you. Well, kind of just, as we start off, can you kind of just give an overview for someone who's listening? Like, what exactly is grave dowsing? What history do we know about how it kind of originated?
Well, I don't know anything really about the history myself, but grave dowsing is the ability to be able to use normally wires to locate graves. And they can also be used to locate living animals. You can douse your pets. You can douse, when I do a presentation for people, I'm dowsing them because we're not usually at a cemetery. The history probably pertains a little back even to what we call water witching, only we don't call it grave witching ever. And it uses the same premise, only I've never personally seen anyone douse for graves with a forked branch or anything like that.
Because the premise it's that somehow the rods that you're using can sense that there is a disturbance, or how does, do we know exactly how it works?
We don't know. Throughout my years at the Historical Society, we tried so many methods. We had a retired mineralogist who was on our cemetery committee, and so he had us try a lot of experiments, like holding magnets to see, was it something to do with the magnetic anything in the soil, and no difference. I had the opportunity to be on the scene when a grave that they did not know there was an unmarked grave there, but I suspected there might be, and they were having to dig for something. So I was able to be on the scene, and I had always heard the soil changed colors and this and that, and in this case, nothing. Until that backhoe uncovered the remains, and they then stopped because they realized and covered it back and had to dig somewhere else for what they were doing. Until then, there was no evidence other than me with my wires for myself.
Well, and for someone who's listening too, can you kind of explain what happens whenever you cross over a grave?
Okay, it changes a little based on the different people. Again, I don't know why. For most people, if you picture that the body is laying east-west, so you're crossing over it north-south or south-north. There's no difference in the direction. But you picture that you're crossing over that way and not following the length of the body. Before you come to the grave, your wires are open. And then as you step onto the grave, or if it's a living person, as you hold your wires over that person, the wires begin to cross. Normally, for most people, they stay crossed until they step off of the grave. I say normally because we do have a member of our historical society that was on our cemetery committee, and in his case, the wires crossed when he first stepped on the grave, but they opened over the body. Then they crossed again on the outer edge of the grave, and then they opened again.
Wow.
The only person I've ever seen that happen with.
Wow.
So I think it's something in our chemical makeup, although most people can douse. They just don't realize it.
Wow. Well, and that was a question I was going to ask you, was if there were, certain people that have a greater aptitude, or if you can learn it, or how does, someone become better if that's possible?
Well, I don't know that you can become better, but maybe you become more skilled at reading how your body's going to react. As an example, when I have taken groups to cemeteries and everyone has their wires, so I've shown them how I do it. The wires work better if they don't go too fast. They work better if they hold them so that they're they span the hip length instead of being 5 inches apart from each other, at which point they cross and you can't get them to open again without opening your arms up. I feel like for myself, when I first was learning, immediately they crossed. So I knew I could do it, but I didn't trust my readings. And as I began to trust more, because you can also gender douse, and as I began to do that more, I learned, I guess you'd say, my pace. The pace I needed to cross the graves when I train people, just to make them feel comfortable with using their wires. I always tell them to picture the music from Here Comes the Bride and walk at that slow pace, but they don't have to do the dip with their steps like we see in the cartoons. But you have to go slow. Too many people, they will see me just glide across because I know what I'm doing and I'm used to it. And for whatever reason, maybe I'm just counting graves, so I'm going quickly. But the wires are going to be moving on them so fast, and they don't know how their body reacts, just as our friend, that they would cross when he was on the outer edge, but they would open over the body and then cross again. If you were trying to learn and you did that, you really wouldn't know how your body reads the graves. Yes, absolutely.
Well, and for you, how did you become interested in this and get started in it?
I've always been interested in cemeteries, and I have been interested in genealogy since I was 15.
Wow.
And so I found the White River Valley Historical Society and joined it, and they had a very small cemetery committee at the time, and I was so excited and went to the first outing, and the first thing they did was hand me a set of wires. And at that time, they were just learning it. So they were the few people, I think there were 4, and 3 of them were comfortable and had started learning it. So they had me try it. And as soon as those wires started moving, I was hooked. I mean, who wouldn't be?
Yeah. Well, so how long have you been doing it?
I've been doing it since about 2005 or 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about 20 years at this point.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is it fairly common around here? Like, I know you're kind of a person I've heard of, heavily attached to that skill or, gift or however we define it. I don't hear about it a ton across the region, but I just may not be talking to the right people. What is your sense on that?
My sense is that some people who are very active with cemeteries have heard about it. Of course, they don't do presentations. They weren't a managing director of a historical society, so they didn't really get a chance to tell people. But there are a lot of people who've heard of it but don't believe it. And I think more people have heard and are still drinking from wells done by people who douse wells or water witch. In our case, the well we have was done. It was doused by my husband's great uncle, and that was over 50 years ago.
Wow.
And that well is still going strong. Also, I have a family member in northern Missouri, and he's retired from the phone company up there. And what they would do to find the electrical lines, he knew all about dowsing because he said we would take a forked stick, and he said, but we didn't waste a good peach branch or anything, and they would stick a penny in the end of it.
Okay.
And that's how they could find the buried phone lines that they needed to find when they were doing repairs or whatever.
Wow.
And I thought that was very interesting. Personally, we had to find where our water line was at my house when we were going to make a change on our driveway. And my husband said, I'll bet you can find it. Use your dowsing wires. I'm like, no, I can only find graves. But do you know, I found that. And I was in Ava with a group, and we had doused and confirmed a story of Confederate soldiers who were buried in a mass burying area in a backyard of a house now. But that story had always been told. And so a group had me come out. And the mayor and I, Mayor of Ava and I were walking along and dowsing just to make sure there weren't any others there. And we both crossed on the water line that ran from the house to the back.
Wow.
So that wasn't just me. I mean, the metal wires will work on something like that too.
Wow.
So I think people do know about it, possibly, but they may not know about the grave part.
And I wonder if it used to be, I mean, like you said, for water, I guess it's always been known, or people commonly know about that. But I wonder if it used to be more common for graves in the past, or maybe not, when there wasn't as, we hadn't not forgotten about cemeteries, but cemeteries weren't as left alone for a while to forget where graves were.
I don't know, because people did tend, even if all they did was mark with a rock, they still did Decoration Day and things like that, and had family picnics at the cemetery and cleaned the cemetery and decorated, and that has fallen by the wayside a lot, which is, for me, sad, but I'll get off that soapbox.
Well, it's interesting to think that, not that, I guess we don't know for sure, or I don't know at this moment, but this is sort of maybe emerging, like, as bigger than it's been in the past with regards to graves.
I think that's true, and I think a lot of it is because of probably the last 15 years of interest in genealogy. The more people hear of genealogy and they learn someone that they're researching was buried in this cemetery, but there's no marker, and then they hear about this. It doesn't prove who's buried in that spot, but it can confirm family lore of who's buried in a spot.
Because that's true what happened in Ava, too. The stories that have been passed down.
Yes, this story had been told, and one of the ladies of the Historical Society was actually, she was a child, and her father would say that when he was watering his dahlias, he'd say he was watering the, quote, rebel graves, quote. And she really wasn't sure if that was true, but she happened to be helping to transcribe and publish the diary of a woman who wrote it in the 1950s, but I believe was a child during the Civil War. And that diary confirmed where that was. So we tested that, and sure enough, there were 17 adult-length male graves there.
Wow.
Don't know that they were the Confederates, but since the lore had said that, and since the diary kind of confirmed the location, confirmed the lore, basically, we really felt convinced that probably would be it, because it's never been a cemetery, so why would there be 17 adult-length males?
Yeah.
All buried east-west except one.
Yeah.
And the one we've always wondered, was that because the women who would have buried them would have been Union.
Yeah.
And the diary said they buried their dead in the cemeteries, and the next day buried the rebel soldiers, quote unquote, on the rebel part. And maybe that was maybe the north-south one was the leader.
Wow.
Or something. Very interesting.
Wow. Well, and so I'm thinking through the applications for dowsing, like things like that, things like genealogy. What other scenarios have you been called in, or have you heard about people using it?
Well, we did have, and I guess in a ways this is genealogy, but it's also just confirmation of burials that don't have real markers. So in Pro Tem Cemetery, which I don't know if you've ever seen it's huge, a lot bigger than what you realize when you get out there, because there's so many flat stones.
Is it next to the church?
Yes.
Pro Tem? Okay.
Yes. And so a member of a certain family had found death certificates from the 1950s of the two people buried in Pro Tem, but there were no tombstones. And they hunted, and they found someone who said, oh yeah, this was my family. She happened to be, I believe this was an aunt or two aunts that were deceased there. And she said, I can take you right to them, but they're just marked with plain rocks. And of course I said, well, that's awfully strange for 1950s. And I said, why would they do that? And she said, well, they never had money. Their family was all buried just with plain rocks. So we went literally to these rocks. She led us straight to them. And she said, now this one, it was a male and female. This one was so-and-so. I checked with my wires. Yes, there was an adult-length male or female based on the name she said there. And then she said, and this one was so-and-so. She had been at their funeral. And so I was able to take photos of those rocks with a little flower on it, and I posted that on a website that is free, so people, even though it's just a plain rock, I did post in there that this was confirmed by a family member such and such. So it did, that's another application for it.
So like a reinforcement of research and tying things together in ways we might not be able to document otherwise.
Right, because in the case of this particular family, the woman that took me there has passed away. So that knowledge would have died with her if she hadn't, if the other family member hadn't located her and I hadn't met her there. And she was able to confirm from her personal knowledge
That's amazing.
of being there. Yes.
Wow. Well, and I guess maybe it was before we started the recording, but also like there are times when roads are being built and things too, right?
Yes.
Because that is, and I mean, is that an area that might, I guess, continue to grow as we have more development and stuff too?
It can, but normally I've worked with MoDOT's Historic Preservation Department, which is fantastic, and the Corps of Engineers has a fantastic department, and of course, State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO's, in all this too. But for example, when they were putting the bridge in, the new bridge in here at Forsyth across Bull Shoals, that end comes out just a short distance away from Snap Cemetery. And so it was an almost daily event at the time that they were trying to decide where that road was going to end, where it was going to come out, for residents to come in and say, they're getting too close to the cemetery. I believe there are unmarked graves there. And I discussed it with them, but of course they can't really base what they're doing based on that. But they were very sympathetic to listen to the concerns, and they made a point of bringing that road in away from the cemetery, knowing that multiple people had said there are graves right down there by that. I remember this as a child, that sort of thing. So whereas they wouldn't have been able to and officially ever have us douse and use that, they have to be able to prove it. I think just the knowledge that so many people knew of it, and we had doused, and we did feel that there were unmarked graves there. Whether they were people or animals, we don't know. They seem to be laid out awfully nicely, though, for animals. But still, they were very sympathetic to that and took that into consideration. So I don't know that they would ever, on their own, I don't think they would be allowed to use that. They would probably do GPR, ground penetrating radar, or something instead, but that doesn't always reveal graves that are settled.
And I guess it's still another data point to help them think through.
Exactly.
So it kind of helps start the conversation around those things, or adds in with what other people are saying too.
And I think nowadays people and businesses and government entities like that, I think everyone's a little more sympathetic to the fact that graves need to be maintained. There are multiple cemeteries throughout the county that have been destroyed from construction. And we're talking construction ranging from larger ones where there were communities being built to maybe in the eastern part of the county, a field, the landowner wanted it dozed. And so they just dozed over the cemetery. And a few people still remember where that is. And I haven't done it yet, but it's so brushy and I'm getting older and stuff. But I need to go out there and try to douse it and count the number of graves and gather that history for the Historical Society.
Well, and this kind of is a tangent slightly off of this topic, but I thought I should have put this on the list of things to ask about before I got here. I know that you guys here at the White River Valley Historical Society have done a lot of work with local cemeteries, right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I remember, and I want to make sure I say it right on here, was it that you went to every cemetery and documented all the graves?
We have documented all the known graves of every cemetery, other than there's a handful in the eastern part of the county in the National Forest.
Okay.
And again, we're getting older, and we used to think nothing of going out after the ticks and snakes were gone in 20-degree weather in the sleet and have a great day. And now we're like whiny. I'm the biggest whiner of them all, and I don't want to go out and do that. But there are a handful still there, and there are 2 family cemeteries, one that's relatively new, just in the last couple of years, that we've not gone out to. And then one that is further on the northern part of the county. And every time we made plans to go there, for 3 years, I believe, running, the weekend we planned to go, someone in that family passed, and they were burying. So we never did make it. I know, it was the most
You're probably like thing. At the end, like, don't plan.
I know. We're like, do we really want to go again and have somebody else pass away in that family? Because so we never have done that one. But the majority we have. There are a few cemeteries we cannot find. And we've had feelers out for a long time looking for several. And a lot of people have heard of them, but nobody can figure out where they're at. And then there are such interesting tidbits. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Turnbow manual or Turnbow manuscripts, Silas B. Turnbow. But when you look at those, and if you've never read them, they are, Silas Turnbow actually gathered the stories from the old timers in the late 1800s and early 1900s and did so they're oral history interviews, but they are from so long ago. And as an example, he talks about the headstones on a hill for these 2 people, and that somebody's told him this story. And he says that these are across the river from the something like the ancient cemetery where Arch Tabor is buried. Well, Arch Tabor is Archibald Tabor, and from that we were able to figure out that that's Rhodes Cemetery. And so we know it'd be across the river, the creek that runs right there by it. But could we really find something after all this time? Once we figured out who owned the land and got the permission, because we never trespass, of course. But there's so many clues. There's so many out there that we'll never know about.
Well, and kind of back when this effort started, was it a concentrated effort that you all decided we're going to visit every cemetery, or was it like you started out with a few and then you just kind of kept going?
Well, before I joined the society, they had started a cemetery committee, and they went to the known ones, and at that time, the records were just kept in notebooks. And about the same time that I joined and was getting active with it, a website came on that is free.
Is that Find a Grave?
Yes. Okay. I didn't know if I could say that.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Find a Grave came up, and everything that's on Find a Grave is user driven. It's not, Find a Grave doesn't have staff that goes and puts
it's like crowdsourced.
Everyone just puts that on. So of course, unless there's a photo of a tombstone, any additional information you have to take with a grain of salt. But we experimented with a cemetery on that because we really wanted to get that online. The earlier group had developed a small website that the Historical Society had a tiny little website at that time and had put more or less a spreadsheet of them on. But we wanted to be able to really reach everyone, and that's when we really we went wild. We were the cemetery hoppers. Not that we hopped, but like attending a hop, I guess, a party. And when we first were doing this and putting them on Find a Grave, digital cameras were just coming into being, so none of us had one. So then we had to go back to the cemeteries to re-photograph them after all that time.
Wow.
And periodically we will pull the list from Find a Grave for Taney County, and you can pull a list that shows which ones don't have photos.
Okay.
But we've ran into a snag. Find a Grave is a fantastic site, but they do have to listen to the concerns throughout the whole country. And so our mineralogist member oh my gosh, he called the Crayola brand company and he researched using sidewalk chalk to be able to read them. And so that's what we did. We only used Crayola. It wasn't made, it was made in the U.S. It didn't have lead. It's safe for children, all of that, because that's the only way you can see them sometimes is to do something like that. We don't approve of shaving cream, things like that. I mean, for ourselves. And Find a Grave now has, you're not allowed to put chalked photos on. We were grandfathered in, but one user in particular started kind of zeroing in not only on the Historical Society, but on our members who had put photos of their own their own families' tombstones on that they had used sidewalk chalk on. And it got to be such a hassle that we've removed those photos and they are available on our website. And so there are a lot of photo requests right now for Taney County cemeteries that, frankly, our chalked photo of a 4 or 5 rocks in a farmer's barnyard driveway are going to be all that will ever exist of that. Those rocks are probably long gone.
Wow.
So that's, we love Find a Grave, but if we have to chalk a stone in order to read it, we don't put it on there. We'll put the memorial on, but we will not put the stone on itself. Wow. And they're not picking on us. I mean, you think to the East Coast, well, there's no way we would ever we would never chalk a stone out on the East Coast, those 1700 stones.
Yeah.
But that's what we call the cotton rock, the soft limestone. Those are eroding so quickly. And so many cemeteries, when we went to them, we hadn't got there soon enough, and we could only, despite our care, soft rags, water, if lichens, we always used ammonia, and then rinsed it off, but that would get the lichens off. Despite our care, so many of them in some cemeteries, there's just a letter or two showing.
Well, and your process when you would go to a cemetery, was it that because I didn't realize you also cleaned the stones. Would you'd clean them all and then photograph them, and then that would...
We only cleaned them if we couldn't read them. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. No, we didn't do cleaning on
wow,
every stone. Oh, no, we'd still be doing it. No, but if we couldn't read them, even your modern stones... the flat, I always remember one for a veteran from World War I, and his stone was just kind of a flat granite stone, but it was so covered with those green flat lichens that you couldn't make out his name, and those are really tough. But when you spray them with the ammonia and you let it sit for a few minutes, and if it's sunny, you maybe spray it again, you can take a plastic paint scraper that you've rounded the edges on, and those will just lift off like pats of butter.
Wow.
And then we rinse all the ammonia off, of course, and then might take a toothbrush to try to get the lichens out of the letters enough then that we could read it and take photos of it.
It's an amazing effort you all put into this. I can't imagine. I mean, it's amazing. I hope it inspired others to do the same thing in their areas.
I hope so. But we also always tried to say, this is what we do here. You've got to find out what's safe for your area. Do you have old tombstones? Never, ever, ever do anything with tombstones that are like on a private family cemetery. I mean, you really have to think of who owns the land, who owns the cemetery, visit with the cemetery associations, and not just run in like gangbusters.
Did you decide in the past that, like, once, I know you said there was a few cemeteries you didn't get to, but in general, there was kind of a point where it stopped, or do you go back and pull new graves and like try to go back and revisit and get those ones?
Occasionally we will try to pull the new. That's what that list from Find a Grave. We'll pull the new burials and see which ones don't have tombstone photos. And we can usually tell, for example, Walnut Shade Cemetery is that would be my husband's family cemetery, as well as the family cemetery of several members of our cemetery committee. And most of those old ones we had to chalk because they're right on the creek. So they were just covered with the lichens and just everything. And so there are a lot of photo requests for those. But when we pull that list, we can tell really, okay, this is a more modern grave, a recent burial, or this is a brand new cemetery. So those are the ones we try to pick up on. But we've noticed there are others in the county doing that too. So, and that's good. Because I know I'm a broken record, but we're all getting older.
Well, I think that's something, at least I see from different historical societies, that it's generally a passionate group of people who get something going and keep it, really fired up for a while. But there's that continuity is always, I think, a challenge for everybody.
It is.
And it's important. And I wish we could solve that question, because that's how keeps things going long term.
Yes, and I think it harks back to everything, just like I mentioned, that people don't decorate the graves annually anymore. They don't go out for Memorial Day or Decoration Day. And, yes, it is legally more of a veteran, but it still used to be the day to decorate all the graves. And I wish more people would think of it in those terms also, and maintain their family members' graves and clean them up a little bit.
You thinking over the cemeteries that you visited, was there one or two that stood out for a particular reason to you, whether they had a really unusual stones or was just especially old compared to some of them, or just anything?
Not that I can think of. There's one between Hilda and Reuter that has a World War I infantryman buried at it, and his tombstone is square on. I mean, it stands up, so it's upright, but it's got 4 square sides that are the same depth, and then it goes up, I think, to a point or something. But carved on one side is the silhouette of a World War I infantryman.
Wow!
And that's the only one we found in Taney County, but I did find one at a cemetery in Douglas County and I just thought, how fascinating is that? There's so many interesting tombstones everywhere. It really is hard to come up with a favorite. Pro Tem has a grave that the tombstone is made out of a bunch of quartz. Yeah. And it's really neat. Meadows Cemetery has what we call the head and shoulder stones, which if you go there in the dusk, you about have a heart attack because it looks like 2 people standing there. Oh. So they're like squared off, upright tombstones, but they have round balls on the top. And you don't see a lot of those in Taney County. I think because we all loved history so much, we pretty much enjoyed every cemetery. There was one we went to, and I think emotionally a stone got me on it because it had a poem on a child who had died, but a child who died in the 1980s. Oh. And the poem that they inscribed on that child's stone was one we saw on stones from the late 1800s, early 1900s. So it really got me that old poem was still being used, and because it was a more modern death of actually a child close to my daughter's age, I think I suddenly saw and felt the emotion behind that poem that in the past I just rattled off without thinking of the sadness behind it. There's just so much that I think every cemetery has to offer.
Yeah, and hearing about things like that, it's a reminder that we're all linked together and time isn't really all that far away either.
Right. That's right. Yeah, it makes me wonder that had they read that poem somewhere themselves and just always remembered it and wanted to put that on, or was it, maybe their family members always put that on? I don't know. But that was one that really emotionally got to me more. Yeah. And different people, some of our volunteers, we had one person who volunteered with us and was very gung-ho. So we gave that person the honor of working on one of the older rows in the cemetery. And at noon, that person was very upset because that row had a family that lost multiple children around the same time, probably a little epidemic. And, yourself as a cemetery lover yourself, that infant mortality was very high. And and we're kind of hardened to that with the old graves. I mean, it's sad, but we mark down the names, the dates. This is so sad, and then we go on. But it really affected this person enough that the person quit.
Wow.
Said, I don't ever want to see this again.
Wow.
Yeah. So you just never know. And that's fine. I mean, more power to that person. They knew their limits.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm thinking through my questions. You going back for a moment to the dowsing. If somebody wanted to learn more about this, are there good resources on the internet, or do you do regular talks about this that they could go learn more?
I do periodically here at the Historical Society. We'll do a day-long beginning research workshop.
Okay.
Which primarily is more for genealogy, but I mean, research is research. If you build your foundational skills, you're fine. And it's a beginning one, and we always do a dowsing episode in that.
Okay.
And people learn. There may be videos online about it. I don't know. I've never looked because of the way I was taught myself. So.
Well, and I didn't even ask. You're from here originally, right?
No.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
My husband is. He is a 5th-generation native.
Okay.
Of both Eastern and Western Taney County. So we're related to everyone through him. We moved down here from Excelsior Springs, which is in Clay County, when I was 10.
Okay.
So I consider myself to be a native, except when my native husband says, no, you're not.
At least virtually lifelong.
Exactly. I'm like, well, I know more about your family history than you do.
Was there anything about any of this, whether it's the dowsing or the cemetery work or even the Historical Society, that you think you'd want to mention that we didn't talk about?
I don't think so, other than I hope that the listeners, I presume if anybody's listening, they're interested in cemeteries. And I hope that they will see the importance of maybe passing this on to school groups or their grandchildren, their children. The care of the cemeteries, as we all pass on over the years, is going to be the younger ones coming up, and it would be nice for them to know how to do, whether it's the dowsing or just going and cleaning a stone or maintaining it. It would be nice to see that being passed on. We've had a lot of groups over the years that we've worked with. 2 of the local schools had genealogy classes for their high schools for a while, and I went to those every other week, was a guest speaker, and then with the Boys and Girls Club years ago, we would take them out to the cemetery and have them adopt a cousin from there, even though they weren't really related, and teach them how to research, but also we decorate the stone and things like that to try to pass that on.
Wow.
So I think education is key. And I think going back to what you asked about with how people can learn to douse or anything, I really think maybe everyone should be cautious with what they see online. Just because it's online does not mean that you're being taught correctly. Of course, to the listeners of this, just because I'm saying this doesn't mean I know what I talk about either.
I think we can trust what you're saying on all of this. But yeah, no, I mean, just even I'm sure that there's probably information out there that would make dowsing into something it's not, too.
Right. Well, yes, there are some people, I always ask when I'm doing a presentation, is it okay if I put my wire over you all in the front row or whatever? And I've had people say no. They're very uncomfortable with that because of whatever reason.
Yeah.
And there is just nothing. It doesn't deal with spirituality or lack of spirituality. It doesn't deal with witchcraft or, too many people have heard water witching, and they tend to think of that as witching instead of just an old-timey phrase for dowsing, and they feel uncomfortable with it for that reason. But we don't do it for anything like that. We're not out there trying to find ghosts with our wires or anything like that.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit about this today.
And I love to talk about all this, of course, and thank you.
Well, thank you, and I guess we will wrap it up for today.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.